The following podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing in this show is intended as a diagnosis, a legal accusation, or a reason to text your ex that you figured out why things went wrong. And we are not responsible for the spiral that you are about to willingly enter. You came here, you pressed play, and you already know what that means. I was 7 years old the first time I performed loyalty I didn't feel. It was a birthday party. Another girl from my class, I'll call her Melissa, but that was not her name, had a New Kids on the Block cake. And the whole table was losing their minds over it. Screaming, pointing. One little girl started crying. I didn't care about New Kids on the Block. But I looked around at that table and I understood something without anyone explaining it to me. Something instinctive. Something that fired in my brain the same way that you duck and cover when something comes flying at your face. If you don't perform this, then you're out of the group. So I looked around and I took it all in and I screamed. I pointed and I told Melissa that Jordan was my absolute favorite, and I meant every word of it with every fiber of my little 7-year-old being. I didn't even know who Jordan was. And I went home that day and I asked my mom to buy me a New Kids poster. Not because I wanted one, but because I needed the prop for the next time. I had to perform. And I've thought about that moment quite a bit over the years. More times than I can probably count now. Just because. Not because it was remarkable, because it absolutely isn't. But because every person listening to this has an exact version of that story. A moment when you performed a belief that you didn't hold. Because the social cost of that honesty was higher than the cost of the lie. We all have one of these stories. Most of us have hundreds. But here's the thing that nobody will say out loud. That reflex, that fast, efficient, socially calibrated reflex, is exactly what a cult needs from you before it can do anything else. Welcome back to This Could Be a Cult. I'm April Rain, and this show is not about cults at all. I mean, it is. Well, anyway, we're going to talk about Jonestown and the Nexium cult and Heaven's Gate and those people who built empires out of other people's need to belong. But don't worry, we'll get there. But that's not the show. The show is about what happened before the compound, before the recruitment, before somebody handed you a pamphlet outside of a yoga studio and told you that they'd absolutely found the answer. This show, it's about the prep work. Because here's what I've come to believe after years of reading everything I could get my hands on about cults, coercive control, and the psychology of belief. Nobody joins a cult. Not really. They joined something that felt like a logical next step in a direction they'd already been walking. The susceptibility was already there. It's built in. It's installed over years by a culture that had no idea what it was doing. Or maybe it knew exactly what it was doing. I mean, in this podcast, we're going to argue both sides. Because pop culture really does condition us. It teaches us who to follow, who to trust, when to override our own instincts, how to perform loyalty that we don't feel, and what it costs to leave. It does this through television and advertising and social media and music and every story that we'd ever been told about what it means to belong. And then, when that actual cult does show up, it doesn't have to build you from scratch. Half that job is already done. And that's this show. That's the whole argument. Every episode is one more piece of the case. And by the time I'm finished with season 1, I promise you, You will not be able to walk through a Target anywhere without narrating how your own conditioning is happening to you in the moment out loud. Your friends will definitely find it annoying, but that's how you know this is working. So let's start somewhere comfortable. Let's start with The Lion King. I know, don't come for me, just hear me out. In 1994, this is arguably the most beloved animated film ever made. It's a story about a lion cub, his dead father, and his destiny to reclaim that throne. And if you grew up with this movie like I did, you definitely have some big feelings about it. Most people do. I mean, come on, the music alone is capable of reducing a 40-year-old to tears in a grocery store. And I definitely 100% say that without judgment, because I am that 40-something-year-old and that grocery store was last Tuesday. So I don't need any judgment either. But here's what The Lion King teaches children. It's wrapped in a Hans Zimmer score, and it's got a voice of James Earl Jones, R.I.P. Your identity is determined at birth by who your father was. Leadership is inherited, it's not earned. The natural order has a hierarchy, and restoring that hierarchy is the hero's journey. Questioning your place in that order will lead no place but to exile. The lions rule because the lions rule. And Hakuna Matata is just a distraction. And at the very end, Simba stands on Pride Rock and roars. And every animal in the kingdom bows, and I choke up and get a tear in my eye every single time. And every animal bows. Every one. And we watched that scene as children, and we just cheered, and you were just overcome with those big feelings, and you felt the righteousness of it and the rightness of it and the restoration of order, and the king was in his place and everything below him was properly arranged. Do you know what that right there is? That's not a story about a lion. That's a story about hierarchy as moral virtue. And we learned it before we could even tie our own shoes. And here's what's interesting. The film does not present this as an ideology. It presents it as nature, as the way things simply are. The circle of life, as that very first, very powerful song announces. You're being told to obey the hierarchy. You're being told hierarchy is the circle. It's the whole thing. It's the structure of existence itself. And that's a much more efficient installation than obey your leaders. Because that's the difference between a rule and a worldview. A rule you can break. A worldview is the lens through which you see the entire world. You can't break it because you can't even see it. It's the thing you're looking through, not the thing you're looking at. And The Lion King is just one example, one film, one childhood afternoon. But it wasn't just one afternoon, was it? It was The Lion King, and it was Cinderella, and it was every sports movie where the team needed a hero to show up and take charge. It was every classroom where one kid got to be the line leader. It was every pop song about riding or dying for someone who never asked your permission. It was the teacher who had a favorite and the family dinner where one person's opinion opened up the entire conversation. And the church where questioning the pastor was called a spiritual problem. It was all of it. Every day. Every single day. For years. And somewhere in that, without a meeting, without a decision, without anyone asking if you consented, you learned what belonging required. You learned that the right leader makes you feel safe. You learned that safety requires loyalty. And you learned that loyalty is proved through performance. And you learn that questioning the structure is very, very dangerous. And you learn that people who leave are just cautionary tales. You didn't learn these things because someone sat you down and said them out loud to you. You learn them the way you learned everything that actually sticks. Through story, through repetition, through emotional reward, and the quiet terror of being left out. Welcome to the installation. All right, so let me give you the 5 things that pop culture installs that cults absolutely depend on. Not as an academic list, but as kind of a tour of your own living room. Number 1, deference to charisma. From the time we are small, we are taught to be moved by the most compelling person in the room. The one who commands attention, the one who speaks with certainty, who makes the complicated feel simple. We call this quality leadership, and we reward it. We vote for it. We buy from it. We follow it on Instagram and defend it in the comment section and cry at concerts because it is the most potent thing we know how to respond to. And the research on cult leaders is almost boring in its consistency. They are, without exception, extraordinarily compelling. Jim Jones could hold a room. Keith Rainier was the smartest person you ever met in your whole life. He would tell you so himself, and somehow that made it more convincing, not less. The NXIVM members were not naive people. They were doctors and lawyers and actresses and executives, and they were completely, catastrophically taken right on in. Because charisma is not a warning sign. We trained ourselves to read it as a green light. So number 2 is group identity as moral framework. And here's the most efficient thing that pop culture ever did. It taught us that who you're with is a proxy of who you are. Your team, your fandom, your brand, your political tribe, your aesthetic, your side of the discourse. And it taught us that the group is always right. Not because the group is actually right, but because leaving the group is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. Social death. The unfollowed, the blocked, the uninvited, the unfriended. The group doesn't need to be correct. It just needs to be yours. And cults, they know this. They build the way that they are deliberately. They didn't invent the mechanism, but they found it pre-installed and they put it to work. So that brings us to number 3, emotional loyalty to strangers. You have feelings. They're real, they're visceral, they're psychological feelings. And they're feelings about people that you may have never met. You have grieved celebrities. I know I have. You have defended musicians from criticism. I know I have. And you have felt personally betrayed when a public figure did something you have disapproved of. I've felt that way before. This is called a parasocial relationship, and it is entirely manufactured. And not by accident either. Not as a side effect, but as a product. The entertainment industry, the influencer economy, and the social media platforms all profit from your emotional investment in people who cannot and will not return it. They are selling you the feeling of a relationship. Which is why when a real person, an actual real person standing in front of you, asking you for your loyalty, offers you that same feeling with an added promise of genuine belonging, that response that you're going to give to them, it's already loaded, and you've been practicing it. So that also brings us now to number 4, the fear of exclusion as a behavioral engine. Go back to my 7-year-old self in the New Kids on the Block birthday party. The decision I made in approximately 3 seconds perform or be excluded. That wasn't a conscious moral calculation. It was a reflex. Fashion, trends, viral moments, the discourse, the hot take economy, all of it runs on the same terror of being outside the thing everyone else is inside of. And if you think you're above it, I want you to consider the last time you pretended to have seen something you haven't. A movie, a TV show, a TikTok, a viral trend, anything. Or the last time you kept your opinion to yourself because the room had already decided and made that decision. Or the last time you laughed at a joke that you absolutely did not find funny because not laughing felt more dangerous than your own honesty. Cults call this keeping sweet. We call it being very socially competent. The difference, it's way smaller than we would like. And so that now brings us to the very last one, which is number 5. And that is the distrust of the self. This one is the quietest, but yet it's the most devastating. Pop culture tells us constantly, in 1,000 different registers, that our instincts are absolutely wrong. Our natural bodies are wrong. Our unfiltered opinions are wrong. Our unmanaged emotions are wrong. Our unoptimized selves are wrong. Buy this, be this, become this. They even tell you that the real you is the problem, but then the real you could be the product. This is the engine of the beauty industry, the wellness industry, the self-help industry complex, the diet culture machine, the productivity optimization market, and the personal branding economy. And all of it runs on the same core message. You, as you are insufficient. But don't worry, we have what you need. And when a cult recruiter tells you something like, the life you've been living has been wrong, but we can show you the right way, they're not introducing you to a new idea. They're completing a sentence pop culture has been building for quite some time. All right, so hear me out. I want to tell you about a document. In 2017, as part of the federal case against Keith Raniere and NXIVM, prosecutors were able to obtain internal training materials used by that organization to recruit and retain members. Researchers and journalists who reviewed those materials noted something that should have been shocking, but wasn't. The recruitment process was designed around pre-existing psychological vulnerabilities, not vulnerabilities that NXIVM created, vulnerabilities they identified and exploited, things the recruit had brought with them from their life before the cult. Fear of not being enough, a need for external validation, difficulty with the concept that loyalty could be conditional, a history of performing membership in groups that probably didn't fully see them. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Because it should. These are not psychological quirks of the unusual. These are the psychological conditions of anyone who grew up inside consumer culture in like the last 50 years. NXIVM didn't build broken people. They found people who had been pre-broken by a system that profits from insecurity and then offers them the fix. The love bombing that cults use as a recruitment tool, that overwhelming warmth, the intense attention, the sense of finally being truly seen. The only reason that works is because most people have been quietly starved of those feelings their whole life. Not because they're unloved, but because the cult they grew up in is far better at withholding validation than distributing it. You're never quite thin enough. You're never quite successful enough. You're never quite right enough. And you're never quite loyal enough to the right things. And all of that being said, then somebody shows up and they look at you and they say, oh, but you are enough. And you're exactly what we've been looking for. You absolutely belong here. And that part of you that's been practicing that moment since you were 7 years old at a birthday party performing feelings that you didn't actually have, That part will say yes every single time before you can even blink. But that's not weakness, and it's not stupidity. It's the entirely predictable outcome of a culture that spends decades telling you that your instincts are wrong, and then sends someone in who offers to replace them. And the mechanism works because we built it. Not the cult leaders, not those cult recruiters, not any of those people. We did it. We built it together. One show, one song, one ad, and one social media scroll at a time. So honestly, I need to tell you about a group that I was in. No, it wasn't a cult. And I want to be very clear about that, because there was no compound and no leader and no weird rituals. It was just a community of women I found online in like my mid-20s. And it was built around a particular approach to self-improvement. We all know those people. They're into wellness. Everything is about mindset and personal growth. That vocabulary, it was very specific. And the women, they were warm and they were smart and they were funny and they were genuinely kind. And the content that I was being shown was intelligent. And the community that they provided for me was very real. But slowly, over time, and without really noticing that it was happening, I started to distrust my own reactions to things. And when something the community said didn't sit right with me, I assumed I was the problem. Resistance was framed as fear, and fear was framed as an invitation to go deeper. Doubt was repackaged as growth. The language was so good, and I mean that. It was really good. It was really good. And it was so good that I couldn't find the seam between my own thoughts and the thoughts that I absorbed from this community. I mean, I wasn't brainwashed. That's way too dramatic and also not quite accurate, I would say. I mean, I was just slowly, very gently, and with the best of intentions on everybody's part, I was taught to distrust the part of me that said wait. But I left eventually, gradually, over time, and there was no drama and there was no big falling out, nothing like that. And for about a year afterwards, I kept noticing things about myself, that I would use phrases that I hadn't used before I joined that community, and that the opinions that I had that were really sharp and steadfast on some things had softened. And the instincts that I'd overridden so many times being part of that community, those stopped showing up for a little while. And it took me a very long time to understand that it wasn't the community's fault. Well, not exactly. And the community was it was just doing what communities do. What pop culture had trained all of us to expect from a community: total alignment, constant validation, and a language that is so shared and so comfortable that it feels like home. But the problem wasn't them. The problem was that I'd been rehearsing for that experience my entire life. And that's why I made this show. Not to warn you that cults are out there. We all know that. But to show you the mechanisms that are in essence just a rehearsal for your joining. And so here's what I want to leave you with after this first episode. None of this is your fault. The conditioning is real. It's deliberate in some places, accidental in others, and profitable everywhere. You didn't ask for it. You didn't consent to it. You were a child watching a movie about a lion, and you had no idea that you were receiving a lecture on the moral legitimacy of hierarchy. But here's the thing about fault. It's actually the wrong question. The right question is now that you can see the mechanisms, can you catch them running? Can you feel the moment when the reflex fires before the thoughts arrive? And can you notice the performance before you've finished performing it? That noticing, that's the whole part of this show. Not judgment, not paranoia, not the exhausting work of distrusting everything. Just noticing. Because the cult that finds you doesn't have to build your susceptibility. It just has to find the door. And pop culture's been hanging that door for a lot of years. The door, it's already there. This show, it's the map. I'm April Rain, and this has been This Could Be a Cult. You already know the rules.